Before they silence this channel, smash subscribe, hit like, and leave a comment, because some stories were never meant to be buried, and this is one of them. The cell that wouldn't stay quiet. The sirens were already screaming when the fog lifted over San Quentin. At 4:17 a.m., California Highway Patrol units boxed in a black prison transport van on Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. The van's rear door was hanging open, chains dragging spark across the asphalt like dying fireworks. Inside, one inmate seat was empty. Blood streaked the steel floor in thin, deliberate lines, as if someone had taken time to paint them. Death row inmate Marcus Hale had vanished. Hale wasn't supposed to be dangerous anymore. He was scheduled for a routine transfer back to San Quentin after a medical evaluation. Shackled, guarded, logged, forgotten. That was the point of death row. Waiting. Years of waiting. Sometimes decades. But now one of California's most tightly controlled prisoners was gone, and one of the transport officers lay dead in a roadside ravine, his throat cut clean enough to suggest practice. Lieutenant Elena Vargas arrived as the sun crawled up behind the razor wire. She had spent 14 years in the Major Crimes Unit, long enough to recognize when a scene didn't want to be understood. The officer's body was positioned too neatly. Hands folded, badge placed on his chest. No signs of a struggle. No skid marks near the ravine. Whoever killed him hadn't panicked. They'd planned. Vargas crouched beside the body, eyes narrowing. This wasn't a botched escape. It was a message. Back at San Quentin, the lockdown was already in effect. Guards moved with stiff urgency, hands never far from their weapons. The prison itself felt like it was holding its breath, concrete walls soaked with a century of violence and regret. Marcus Hale's cell was still intact. That was the first red flag. Hale had been on death row for 17 years, convicted of murdering a Silicon Valley defense contractor and his wife in their Palo Alto home. Execution style. No forced entry. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. The media called him the engineer killer, fascinated by his background in mechanical systems and his emotionless demeanor in court. But Hale had always claimed innocence. Not loudly, not desperately. He never gave interviews, never appealed to public sympathy. He just waited. When Vargas stepped into cell 3 to 17, she felt the temperature change. Hale had left behind everything: letters, legal papers, even his Bible. The bed was perfectly made. On the concrete wall above it, scratched so faintly it almost disappeared under the fluorescent light, was a phrase Vargas recognized instantly. They lied first. Prison record showed Hale had received a visitor 3 weeks earlier. Unscheduled, cleared through administrative override. The visitor's name was redacted. Vargas demanded the footage. The surveillance video showed Hale sitting calmly behind the glass, hands folded. Across from him sat a woman in her early 40s, sharp suit, dark hair pulled tight. She slid a single manila envelope across the table. Hale didn't open it. He smiled. That smile haunted Vargas long after the screen went dark. The warden insisted it meant nothing. Death row inmates got strange visitors all the time: lawyers, advocates, researchers. But Vargas had seen enough to know when rules were bent for a reason. Then came the second body. 24 hours after Hale's disappearance, a correctional officer was found dead in his San Rafael apartment. No forced entry, no theft, just a gunshot to the head, fired from close range. The officer had been on duty the night Hale was transferred. Now it was clear. This wasn't an escape. It was a purge. Vargas assembled a task force that same night. CHP, FBI, Internal Affairs. Nobody trusted anybody. Death row cases had a way of rotting institutions from the inside out. As they dug into Hale's original conviction, uncomfortable details surfaced fast. The murder weapon? Never found. The neighbor who testified about seeing Hale's car that night? Later arrested for perjury in an unrelated case. The lead detective? Retired early. Settled out of state. No forwarding address. And the defense contractor Hale was accused of killing had been under federal investigation at the time of his death for illegal arms exports. The case that once looked airtight now felt manufactured. Vargas visited Hale's old trial files late into the night, surrounded by coffee cups and flickering desk lamps. Every page whispered the same thing. Someone needed Hale locked away. At 2:11 a.m., her phone buzzed. A burner number. No caller ID. When she answered, a man's voice spoke softly, evenly. "You're looking in the wrong direction, Lieutenant." Marcus Hale didn't escape death row. Death row escaped him. The line went dead. By morning, the media had caught wind of the story. Headlines screamed about a death row breakout, but Vargas knew better. Hale wasn't running. He was hunting. Security footage from a motel in Vallejo showed Hale checking in under a fake name, moving without urgency. He looked healthier than he had in years. Focused. Awake. On the nightstand beside the motel bed, police later found the contents of the manila envelope from the prison visit. Photos. Autopsy reports. Internal memos stamped confidential. And one document that made Vargas's blood run cold. A sealed affidavit from a former assistant district attorney, signed, dated, and never submitted to the court. It stated that evidence had been intentionally suppressed during Marcus Hale's trial. Evidence that would have implicated someone else. Someone powerful. As Vargas stated the affidavit, she realized Hale had never been waiting for execution. He'd been waiting for permission. That permission had finally arrived. And whoever had opened that door had no intention of letting this end quietly. Because when Vargas turned the page, she saw the final line scrawled in red ink across the bottom of the document. "If they kill me before this is read, look inside the walls." But when investigators returned to cell 3 to 17 later that afternoon and removed the concrete panel behind Hale's bed, what they found sealed Marcus Hale's fate and exposed a secret buried inside California's death row for decades. The walls that remember. The concrete panel behind Marcus Hale's bed came loose with a dry crack, like a bone snapping under pressure. What spilled out wasn't cash, weapons, or contraband. It was paper, hundreds of pages, yellowed and brittle, bundled with electrical tape and wrapped in plastic. Prison blueprints, guard shift schedules, internal memos stamped redacted, and names, dozens of them, written again and again in Hale's precise handwriting. Lieutenant Elena Vargas felt the weight of the room shift. Death row wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a vault, and Hale had been collecting keys. The document spanned 25 years. Inmate deaths ruled suicides. Executions rushed through appeals. Evidence mishandled. Witnesses coached. Files altered after verdicts were delivered. A pattern emerged. Cases tied to the same prosecutors, the same expert witnesses, the same internal review boards that always cleared themselves. At the center of it all was a quiet program buried inside California's justice system, a classified partnership between private defense contractors and the state designed to protect national security interests from exposure in open court. Marcus Hale had murdered a defense contractor. He had tried to expose one. Before Vargas could finish cataloging the documents, Internal Affairs shut her down. The evidence was seized. The room was sealed. Orders came down from Sacramento with surgical speed. Stand down. That was when Vargas knew she was no longer just investigating a fugitive. She was standing too close to something that didn't want witnesses. 3 hours later, one of her task force analysts failed to show up for work. By nightfall, his car was found abandoned near Point Reyes, engine cold, driver's door open. His phone was crushed under the tire, screen shattered. No blood, no body, just silence. Meanwhile, Marcus Hale moved through Northern California like a ghost who knew every corridor before it was built. He avoided cameras, paid in cash, slept in places no one thought to search, maintenance tunnels, storage units, a decommissioned ferry dock. He wasn't hiding. He was following a list. The first name was Victor Raines. Raines had been a junior prosecutor during Hale's trial, barely 30 at the time. He'd built a respectable career since then. Private practice, political donors, charity galas. A man who smiled easily on television. Hale waited until Raines left a fundraiser in Marin County, slipping into the back seat of his luxury sedan without a sound. The dashcam footage would later show the car pulling to the side of the road, hazard lights blinking calmly into the dark. Raines never screamed. When his body was discovered the next morning, there were no signs of torture. No theft. Just a single gunshot wound to the chest and a file folder placed neatly on his lap. Inside the folder was a copy of the suppressed affidavit and a handwritten note. I waited 17 years. The media exploded. Now this wasn't an escape story. It was an execution list. The governor held a press conference calling Hale a domestic terrorist. Federal agencies joined the manhunt. Roadblocks went up. Helicopters circled like vultures. But Hale stayed ahead. Vargas watched the coverage from her office, hands clenched, knowing the truth was being buried again, this time under panic. She tried to leak the documents anonymously. Every attempt failed. Emails bounced. Calls dropped. One reporter warned her quietly to stop asking questions if she wanted to keep her badge. Then her apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen. Nothing damaged. Except for her case files. They were gone. That night, Vargas found a message taped to her door. You don't know which side you're on yet. She slept with her gun under her pillow. Across the bay, Hale crossed off another name. Then another. Each killing followed the same ritual. No chaos, no spectacle. Just proof. Proof that these people had signed off on lies, buried evidence, sent men to death row knowing the truth would die with them. Until it didn't. But the list was changing. The next target wasn't a prosecutor or witness. It was a woman from the prison visitation footage. Her name was Claire Holloway. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't a journalist. She was a former DOJ compliance officer who'd vanished from public records 12 years earlier after filing an internal complaint that never reached court. Holloway had found the original evidence Hale tried to expose and buried it herself. Not out of greed, out of fear. When Hale finally confronted her at a cabin near Lake Tahoe, she was already packing. You should have let me die, she said, voice shaking but eyes defiant. This doesn't end the way you think it does. Hale didn't raise the gun. He dropped it. You're not on my list, he said. You're my witness. Holloway broke down then, years of silence collapsing at once. She confessed everything, how she'd been threatened, how the program had been designed to sacrifice individuals to protect industries, how death row had become a containment unit for inconvenient truths. She told Hale something else too. The program wasn't over. It was expanding, and someone inside the task force hunting him was part of it. When Vargas arrived at the cabin hours later, tipped off by an anonymous call, she expected bodies. Instead, she found Holloway alive and Hale gone. On the table between them sat a flash drive labeled simply, Death Row. Inside were recordings, names, proof strong enough to burn careers and collapse institutions. But as Vargas plugged it into her laptop, a realization hit her with terrifying clarity. This wasn't an expose. It was leverage. And Marcus Hale wasn't trying to clear his name. He was forcing the system to choose who deserved to live with the truth, and who would die protecting it. As sirens echoed in the distance and helicopters cut across the sky, Vargas understood the real danger. If Hale reached the final name on his list, there would be no one left to stop what came next. The last name, the final name, wasn't written in Marcus Hale's handwriting. That was a detail that stopped Lieutenant Elena Vargas cold. She stared at the flash drive's index file as dawn broke over the bay, her office blinds casting prison bar shadows across the walls. Every other document carried Hale's precise, mechanical script, except one, a single PDF, typed, unsigned, untitled. Inside was a personnel record stamped with a clearance level Vargas had only seen once before during a classified joint task force years earlier. The name at the top belonged to someone she knew very well. Deputy Attorney General Thomas Klein, the man currently overseeing the manhunt for Marcus Hale, the man giving daily press briefings about justice, safety, and closure, the man who had personally approved the sealed override allowing Hale's mysterious prison visitor. Vargas felt the air leave her lungs. Klein wasn't just connected to the program. He was its architect. Before she could process it, her phone rang. An internal line. Klein wants to see you, her captain said. Now! The drive vanished into Vargas's jacket pocket as she stood. She understood the rules now. This wasn't about arrests. It was about containment. Klein's office sat on the top floor, glass walls overlooking the city like a throne above a battlefield. He greeted her with a tired smile, sleeves rolled up, news footage muted on a wall-mounted screen behind him. They are calling him a folk hero now, he said calmly. Funny how quickly narratives shift. You framed an innocent man, Vargas replied, voice steady despite the pressure in her chest. Klein didn't flinch. We framed a liability, he corrected. and kept far worse men free to protect national interests. That's how the real world works, Lieutenant. She reached for her badge instinctively. He noticed. Careful, he said. You don't outrank the truth I'm protecting. That was when the lights went out. Not a blackout. A surgical shutdown. Emergency lights hummed on as alarms began to wail throughout the building. And somewhere deep in the structure, a gunshot echoed. By the time security flooded the floor, Klein was dead in his chair, a single round through his heart. No forced entry. No witnesses. On his desk lay a manila envelope. Inside was the original affidavit, unsigned, unsealed, and a note. Now you can't pretend you didn't know. Marcus Hale disappeared that night for good. The official story claimed he died in a shootout near the Oregon border. No body was ever released. No autopsy. Just a closed file and a quiet directive to move on. The death row documents vanished into classified archives. Claire Holloway entered witness protection under a name Vargas never learned. And the state resumed execution 6 months later. Publicly, nothing changed, but Vargas did. She resigned from the force within the year, unable to reconcile the badge with what it had protected. She testified quietly before a sealed federal panel that never convened again. Sometimes, late at night, she replayed the last known surveillance footage of Marcus Hale, walking alone into a crowded train station, blending into ordinary life with the ease of a man who had already survived death. She wondered if he was watching, waiting. 3 months after Klein's death, an inmate on death row at San Quentin was found dead in his cell, ruled a suicide, but carved faintly into the concrete wall behind his bed were 4 words that never made it into the report. They lied first. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one.